What would happen to the galaxy at large if Count Dooku had never chosen to abandon the light for the dark and become a Sith? How much would this one decision change things? For starters, Qui-Gon Jinn's death was the final straw for Dooku in canon. It pushed him over the edge and into full immersion within the dark side. In this timeline, Dooku would instead rejoin the Order after Qui-Gon's death, committed to doing what he could to combat the new Sith threat. He'd set aside his differences with the corrupt Republic for now, firmly believing that the elimination of the Sith was the priority. This would drastically affect Palpatine's plans. Dooku did a lot of the legwork in setting up the Separatists, as well as establishing the clone army. Palpatine would need to find someone else now to fill that role. I find it likely that he would set his sights on another, much younger Jedi with a troubled history, Quinlan Vos. Vos would be in his early 20s at this point, a strong Jedi Knight with vast potential. He would be the Jedi Palpatine would settle for once it became apparent to him that Dooku would not turn. I did consider Asajj Ventress as a possible replacement for Dooku, but it would be years until she would be discovered, if at all. Furthermore, Vos was better trained, less of a developmental project, and had a higher ceiling than Ventress, making him a much more appealing apprentice for Palpatine. Palpatine would Christian Vos with the Sith name Darth Falton. The Sith would still work Sidious, manipulating him into ordering the clone army before having him killed, just as he was in the canon timeline. Dooku would be suspicious and would immediately begin investigating the death of his longtime friend. Dooku was resourceful, and since there was not yet a war raging on, he had some free time. Dooku would discover Sidious' shot-down ship on the moon of Obadiah, whereas in the original timeline, Plo Koon contacted the Jedi Council and told them of his findings, which enabled Palpatine to learn about it. Dooku had a much more independent streak. He would confront the Pike Syndicate himself and would strong-arm them into allowing him to see Silman, the aide that was with Sidious when he died. Overall, Dooku would learn that Sidious was killed in order to allow a man named Falton to impersonate him, so that he could order a clone army for the Republic. Dooku would at this point alert the Jedi Council as well as the Senate and, well, the Senate. Palpatine would be caught between a rock and a hard place. He would know that advocating to proceed with the clone army, despite it having been ordered by the apparent enemies of the Republic, would look highly suspect to the Jedi. But the alternative option would be to scrap the clone army together, which would throw a serious wrench in his plans. Palpatine would ultimately decide to discontinue the clone army in order to avoid Jedi suspicion. However, this would not stop Palpatine's machinations, not even delay them. He would begin orchestrating a need for a grand standing army of the Republic. No longer having to wait 10 years for the clone army to develop, Palpatine and Vos would accelerate the formation of the Separatists. Using their droid army, the Separatists would then suddenly attack a planet on the edge of the Republic, utterly shocking the Republic, yet giving it time to react. Chancellor Palpatine would now obviously have no choice but to form an army and would implement a draft across the Republic. The Jedi would be pulled into the conflict as generals, just as they were in the real timeline. The Separatists would hold a huge advantage in the early portions of the war. The Republic forces would be poorly trained and unorganized, having been thrown together in such a brief amount of time. Publicly, blame would fall upon the Jedi for poor leadership as loss after loss piled up for the Republic. The Galactic Civil War, as it would now be called, as this war no longer involved clones, would begin about 6 years before it did in the canon timeline. Thus, Anakin Skywalker would be only 13 years old, and Obi-Wan would still be a Jedi Knight. Palpatine would still possess the goal of eventually making Anakin his apprentice, but at only 13 years old, Anakin was nowhere near ready enough to be the apprentice Palpatine needed. So, Palpatine would take measures to prolong the war for as long as needed. Anakin would essentially grow up in a time of total war. He'd see many of his friends and comrades die on the battlefield. This was not how a Jedi Padawan was supposed to be trained at all. After all, Jedi were keepers of the peace, not soldiers. This would no doubt have a negative effect on the teenager. Dooku, too old to be on the front lines, would fall into a leadership role alongside Yoda, similar to the role that Mace held. He would be particularly difficult on Anakin, not buying into the Chosen One prophecy and outwardly saying that Anakin should have never been trained to begin with. This would obviously greatly anger Anakin, though with Dooku's wisdom and leadership, I believe the Jedi Order as a whole would be in a better position here than they were in the original timeline. Vos would take Ventress as his apprentice, and the pair would slowly fall in love like they did in Dark Disciple. They would make plans to eventually overthrow Sidious and rule the galaxy together. together. Anakin and Voss would form a fierce rivalry, with Voss easily besting Anakin in some of their earlier duels. But as the years slipped by and Anakin grew more experienced, he would begin to truly challenge the Sith Lord, coming close to killing him on several occasions. However, unlike with Dooku in the original timeline, Anakin would never get the pleasure of killing Voss. Once Palpatine saw that Ventress was growing more and more powerful, he would order his apprentice to kill her. Unfortunately for him, it would not be so simple. Voss was in love with Ventress, so the duo would decide to make their move against Palpatine. Voss would request a meeting with Palpatine in an abandoned building on Coruscant. It would be there that Voss and Ventress would attempt to ambush and kill Palpatine. But Palpatine was no fool. He would suspect what his apprentice was seeking to do. Voss and Ventress would take their best shot at Palpatine. They would fail, however. Palpatine vastly outclassed them, even with their combined strength, and Palpatine would not hesitate to kill them both. First, making Voss watch Ventress die, and then informing Voss, as he died, that he was only ever a mere tool in Palpatine's grand scheme. He would have no issue killing his apprentice, knowing that Anakin was almost ready to be seduced by the dark side. Without true leadership, the Separatists would begin to lose ground rapidly. General Grievous would flee to Utapau, and Obi-Wan would be sent to deal with him. Anakin would by now be in his early 20s. He would still be secretly married to Padme, a weakness that Palpatine would still exploit. However, in this timeline, Anakin was much more jaded toward the Jedi. Dooku was harder on him than even Mace. It took Dooku a lifetime to be able to attain such skill and mastery with the Force, and yet Anakin at 23 years old rivaled him already. Anakin perceived it as jealousy, and perhaps he was right. His requests to be promoted to the rank of Master were repeatedly shot down by Dooku, Windu, and Yoda, despite the fact that Anakin's power rivaled theirs. Once Palpatine revealed his identity to Anakin and made his case, Anakin was willing to listen. Palpatine would tell Anakin how he could save Padme from death. Anakin would be free from the oppression of the Jedi, free to see his abilities flourish without restraint. He would assure Anakin that together they could end the war Anakin had been fighting since he was 13. After all, wouldn't ending the decade-long war be the right thing to do? Anakin would agree to become Palpatine's apprentice, believing that it was for the greater good for both Padme and the galaxy as a whole. Their next step would be to orchestrate what could be perceived as an assassination attempt by the Jedi. As the war continued on and Palpatine remained in power much longer than his term allowed, the Jedi began to distrust the Chancellor. So when Anakin contacted Dooku and told him that Palpatine had confessed to being the Sith Lord, the Jedi Master was willing to believe him. Dooku, along with Mace Windu, would decide that they would need to act immediately. The two esteemed Masters would take a gunship to the Chancellor's offices, along with Kit Fisto, Saesee Tiin, and Agen Kolar. When the band of Jedi Masters arrived, they would find the Chancellor, but he would not be alone. In his office sat Mas Amedda, Senator Organa, and Anakin. The Jedi Masters would all draw their lightsabers, announcing that Palpatine was under arrest. Palpatine would feign surprise, putting on an act for the benefit of Senator Organa. Bail Organa would no doubt be confused, but Anakin would ignite his lightsaber and step between the Jedi and the Chancellor, telling the Senator to go get help. This would obviously complicate the arrest attempt, so as Bail made an attempt to leave, Dooku would send him into the wall with the Force, rendering him unconscious. It is at this point that an absolutely legendary battle would ensue.
It's treason, then.
Palpatine smiled wryly at the Jedi, slowly rising to his feet. Palpatine spun at the group of Jedi, quickly taking out Kolar and Tiin with a flick of his blade. Anakin lunged at Dooku, but the Master of Makashi easily deflected his blade with an elegant parry. Palpatine took on Fisto and Windu alone, spinning and twirling with his crimson blade, catching Fisto across the neck and decapitating him in an instant. Windu parried a storm of cuts and slashes from Palpatine, channeling his mastery of Vapad like no other. Anakin laid on an onslaught of powerful strikes at Dooku, who was pressed back by the sheer power of the newly minted Sith Lord. In desperation, Dooku reached out with the Force toward one of Palpatine's sculptures and flung it at Anakin, sending him flailing across the room. Palpatine and Windu locked blades, each scowling at one another with malice as Dooku quickly moved to join their duel. Dooku drove the point of his blade at Palpatine's head, but Palpatine veered off, dodging the jab with shocking agility. Anakin got to his feet, rage and hatred turning his eyes to Sith yellow. Four of the most esteemed duelists in the galaxy met head-on. Great swirls and sparks of blue, purple, and red danced around the room like a whirlwind of color, crashing and colliding into each other. Anakin planted a foot into Dooku's chest, sending him crashing through the glass window and onto the building top below. Anakin nodded at Palpatine as he leapt down in pursuit of Dooku. Dooku jabbed and swiped at Anakin with his blade, but Anakin blocked each one of Dooku's strikes. Dooku was growing tired. He was immensely skilled, but he was still an old man with failing stamina. Anakin continued to wear Dooku down with heavy swing after heavy swing, weakening the old Jedi with every connection their blades made. Dooku tried once more to pierce Anakin's guard with a jab, but Anakin circle parried him, instantly countering with an upward strike that separated Dooku's hand from his wrist. Dooku gasped in shock and fell backwards, looking up at Anakin, awaiting his imminent death. Suddenly, a scream from overhead rang out. Anakin spun to watch as Palpatine absolutely eviscerated Windu with a storm of Force lightning, blasting him out of the window and to his death. Anakin turned back to face Dooku to finish the old man off, but was caught off guard by the old Jedi, who sent him flying backwards with the Force. Dooku collected his curved lightsaber and made his escape, leaping off the roof and onto a speeder which carried him away from the scene. Palpatine would then contact the military commanders of every major battle and would inform them that the Jedi had betrayed the Republic and were to be treated as the enemy. This version of Order 66 would simply be nowhere near as effective as the original. Some commanders would obey Palpatine's command, others would not. This would mean the survival of many more Jedi than in the canon timeline. Yoda and Obi-Wan would be among the survivors, as well as Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi. The Jedi Temple would still be raided though, and most of the Jedi there would be slaughtered by Darth Vader and his troops. Dooku would escape Coruscant and meet back up with the surviving members of the Council to plan their next move. Well, that's where I'm going to leave it for now, but this definitely seems like it could be a two-parter. It's really crazy to see just how much things changed by having Dooku remain a Jedi. Let me know what you think will happen next. The possibilities are truly endless. Remember to like and subscribe, new videos every Wednesday, as well as Mandalorian episode breakdowns every Friday. Thank you so much for watching, folks, and I'll see you in the future.